Sociology 345, video lecture 09. We've already talked about Max Weber, and we're going to talk about him a little bit more today. Before, we were looking at him in relation to various ideas about reflection theories, how either culture is a reflection of the society, a la Marx, or the ways that society may be a reflection or may be derived from or may be driven by culture. And that's why we were looking at the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism and Weber's ideas about how religion is bound up with the practices that made capitalism take off in its early form. We're now going to talk about Weber in more basic terms and look at his fundamental theoretical concerns. It'll help us orient ourselves more to thinking about culture as a set of meaningful practices, because Weber was very interested in meaning, the way that people made sense of the world. He was focused on social action especially, and he saw sociology as the comprehensive science of social action. And the basic question being, what is it that motivates social action? How is it that people perceive the world, give it meaning, and then based on those meanings, take action? So social action is a main concern of his. Second is the idea of authority. The basic questions being, how is authority legitimated? Given that people make meaning in the world, that meaning motivates their action, people are active, what is it then that motivates them to accept the authority of others? What is it that makes authority legitimate? And by this we don't mean how is it that some people can exert power over others using force, but rather how is it that people have power because other people are willing to give it to them? How is it legitimate? And underneath everything in Weber is this concern with rationalization, what he considered the driving force in human history. The increasing rationalization and organization of everything that human beings do. It's sometimes described as the disenchantment of the world, so that he traced the beginnings of religion in superstition and magic, and its development into ecstatic sorts of cults and religions, and then finally into the modern salvation religions that, although oriented toward irrational values, are actually quite rational in the way they operate. And that's why we see these huge organizations and institutions that we call organized religion or churches. So we'll want to think about social action and its different types and authority and its different types, all the while keeping in mind this idea of rationalization, the disenchantment of the world. So we'll talk about typologies of action. And Weber was all about typologies, what he called ideal types, identifying and cataloging phenomena in terms of its most ideal form, so that you could take these ideal forms and use them as a tool to examine the social world. These ideal forms don't actually exist in the social world. The social world is much more messy than this. But these are the ideal types of action that one sees. And there were 4 of them for Weber: traditional action, value-oriented rational action, affective emotional action, and goal-oriented rational action. We'll take them up one by one. We'll start with traditional action. Traditional action is action that is guided by custom or habit. It's the bulk of everyday action, the kinds of things that we do every day without really thinking about it. just because it's a habit or it's a custom, it's our routine. And social actors aren't thinking about their actions in terms of goals and means. They're not thinking about what they're trying to achieve through this action and how they might achieve it. They're just acting. So in a traditional society, people, for example, had very specific roles to play, maybe. If you dropped into a tribe in the ancient world and asked someone why it was that they were cultivating corn in the field, that person might look at you like you were crazy. Like, what do you mean? I cultivate corn because that's what I do, and it's just what I do. It's a very old type of action, but of course we still see it. We still see it today. You find it in rituals, traditions, customs, and in everyday routines. Next, we have affective action or emotional action. And by this, we simply mean action that is anchored in the emotional state of the actor. Again, this is a type of action in which the actors do not think about their action in terms of goals and means. They're simply acting. One is simply overcome by anger, for example, and one acts out, or overcome by lust or love, and simply acts in ways that later, perhaps looking back from a rational state of mind, one asks oneself, what was I thinking? And in fact, the answer is, well, you weren't thinking anything. You were acting on the basis of an emotional motivation. Next, we have this thing called value-oriented rational action. And by value, Weber means something very similar to what we mean when we have defined culture in this class. You know, a value is a standard of judgment or something that people simply believe in or hold to be true. And it's not rational. In fact, we would describe it as irrational. And that's not to say that it's bad or that we're using the term irrational in a pejorative sense. It simply means that it's something that's just an article of faith, something that is just accepted without question. That there's no rational justification for it. And so value-oriented rational action is action that's striving for a value, an irrational value, but there's a rational weighing of the means, of the methods used to attain that value. So the means are rational, but the goals, and really we would better say values here, the end product is not rational. And so Weber, as a classic example, pointed to the modern salvation religions to say that, well, in these salvation religions, the ultimate value is, well, salvation. One gets to go to heaven, many people call it. And that's not rational, meaning it's an article of faith. It's something that people believe in. And in fact, the religions take pride in this idea that it is an article of faith, that one has to believe, one has to have faith in this idea. There isn't a scientific way to prove or disprove the existence of this place, heaven. On the other hand, the way that one gets there through these organized religions, the way that one gets to heaven, is very rational. The modern organized salvation religions have codified rules and regulations, basically. I mean, we don't call them that, but what are the 10 Commandments? There are 10 strict rules that one should follow if one belongs to that belief system, and it's very rational. You do this and you get to go. You don't do this and you don't get to go. You make a mistake, you have to make up for it, etc., etc. Value-oriented rational action. And then the last type, ideal type of action that Weber discussed was goal-oriented rational action. And this is where you are striving for a substantive goal as opposed to a value. And there's a rational weighing of both the means and the ends. Both the method to get to your goal and the goal itself are subject to rational thought. They can be evaluated, reevaluated, modified, changed, analyzed, etc. So we think of this as the most modern form of social action. We think about it in terms of how we organize our businesses and how we set goals and how we maybe reevaluate and change what our goals are as we apply our methods. You could think about it very simply as your own educational plan in college. You pick a major for whatever reason and you speak with an advisor, I hope, that's a good idea, and you come up with a plan of how to achieve a degree in that major. And then as you're going, if you're like most students, you reevaluate and you decide you might want a different goal, or it might be more expedient to major in a different discipline in order to get to your overall goal, whatever that might be. And so then you've reevaluated both the goal and then reevaluated the means. So this is the most modern form of action. It's the most rational form. But of course, all these types of actions exist at the same time, and we're engaged in them often in a variety of very messy ways, all at the same time. Goal-oriented rational action, again, if you're thinking about it properly, fits very well with our ideas about bureaucracy and about democracy. It gives people, or it requires actually, people to have a great deal of agency, to take responsibility and to act and to think through and weigh the consequences of their action. Next, we'll talk about Weber's typology of authority. The ideal types of authority, there are three: traditional, charismatic, and rational legal. And you can imagine the way they correspond in many ways with the different types of action. Traditional authority is authority that's based in the sanctity of tradition. It's not codified in any impersonal rules. It's not like a democracy or a bureaucracy where there are rules and regulations. It's about tradition. And authority belongs to particular persons, not particular offices, but particular persons, and they inherit it, or they are given it by divine right, or both. So if you think about the monarchies, for example, why is the king or the queen the queen? Well, the king is the king because his father was the king, and he was king because his father was the king. And if you go back far enough, the king is the king because God said so, and it's sanctioned by the church, and one simply has to believe. Charismatic authority is based in allegiance to extraordinary virtuosity. That's the way Weber put it. That is, there are some people in the world who have extraordinary characteristics. He said they're extraordinary virtuous. They have virtuosity in various realms. They're either heroic. They've exhibited heroic qualities in war or in other forms of action. They are perceived to be maybe extremely ethical. Think about why it is that Gandhi had so many followers. Or they're seen as having a religious kind of charisma. And again, this is not based in sort of rational rules and regulations and offices. It's a characteristic that certain people have and others don't. Some people we recognize as great leaders for no other reason than they are extraordinary. And although our modern system in the United States is a democracy and is a rational legal system that we'll talk about in a second, there is also a great deal of charismatic authority that takes place within that system. That is, people win elections often based on charisma. Rational legal authority, again, the latest form of authority, the most rational, is rational, anchored in impersonal rules, like the way bureaucracies work, the way democracy works. And authority is legally enacted and contractually established. So we establish contracts that define what authority is and who has it and when they have it and when they don't have it and what they need to do to keep it. And we do that in business and literally with paper and signatures, etc. And we do it in our political system. We don't usually have written contracts with our, literally written contracts with our elected officials, but there are contracts. There are expectations. There are rules. And when they are violated, people are recalled or impeached or otherwise politically marginalized. So again, that's the most modern form of authority. It, of course, has a great affinity with goal-oriented rational action. But at the same time, all of these types of actions and all of these types of authority are at play. They have their historical moments where they dominate, but they never quite disappear. They're always with us. So that's Weber's main theoretical concerns. Social action and its motivations, authority and its legitimations. These ideas will be useful as we continue our discussions of culture, allowing us to think about culture as a set of meaningful practices that help us understand the motivations of people and how people acquiesce or not to various kinds of authority.